This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. The summer holidays are over, the children are back at school, the dew is heavy on the ground and the nights are drawing in. But cheer up, Feedback is back, the programme where you set the agenda and where conflict of one sort or another is rarely absent, even at the proms.
Well, I'm sorry that we're unable to continue with our broadcast of tonight's prom by the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra because of disruption in the Royal Albert Hall.
And have you heard of this? You will, if Radio 4 has anything to do with it.
Goodbye.
It was fairly intimidating, I think.
What did he want of me?
It's a novel, I have to confess, I hadn't heard of.
My first response was, this is undramatisable.
And I would be content, and I would be proud to die a communist.
You may have to leave the country and travel to Moscow to avoid it, as this network gives the blockbuster treatment to Vasily Grossman's Russian war epic Life and Fate, and blows several other programmes away in order to make space. And as we prepare for the long-awaited BBC announcements on how it plans to make £20 million in savings, we think we've identified an early initiative, getting Auntie's money's worth from this piece of music. But first, what's the difference between news and history? Well, Radio 4 doesn't seem to know, according to many of you who wrote in about last weekend's coverage of the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Special editions of Something Understood, Broadcasting House and Sunday, to name a few, supplemented considerable coverage on the news bulletins, and not just on the day itself. Was it over the top?
My name is Frank Cowell, and there was a kind of breakfast, lunch and tea approach which seemed to focus rather on sensationalism. Rather than the coverage being analytical, it focused on emotion.
I'm Warwick Armstrong, North Oxford. Of course, the BBC's totally right to remember the US tragedy of September the 11th, but where is the compassion in the BBC for others who've also suffered and who are now almost forgotten? I'm thinking particularly of the scores of thousands of civilians who died in the American and British shock and awe assault on Baghdad. I can remember another 11th of September that is now virtually forgotten in the media. The day of the 1973 US-supported military overthrow of the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile.
Charlotte Evans from East London. I understand just how terrible 9/11 was, but what I can't understand is why this event gets so much more attention than other disasters. 9/11 falls into the category of history, not the category of news.
And it wasn't just Radio 4 that got it wrong. According to some listeners, Hilary Reid said 5 Live was particularly guilty of mawkish, unbalanced attention. But there was praise for Radio 4 for something American.
In this special edition of Americana, we're going to take a step back from today's ceremonies and try to define just how the last decade has changed America.
My name's Clive Lovelace. I live in London W10. I've naturally been to New York. I have clients and friends there. I just found that just listening quietly to that programme the other night was just truly moving, and I thought it was a wonderful programme.
David Edwards and Edward Jones were among a number of listeners who emailed to say that they couldn't see any sense in Radio 4 controller Gwyneth Williams' decision to axe the series, and would she please make a U-turn? I'm afraid I don't think this network's Iron Lady will do that, so last Sunday's was almost certainly the last Americana ever. Russia, on the other hand, seems to be winning the Radio Cold War. Russophiles may want to clear their diaries next week when every Radio 4 drama slot, except those occupied by the Archers, of course, is allocated to a blockbuster World War II epic, Life and Fate. But the trails for it have alienated some already.
Stop banging on about it. You have succeeded in making sure that I, for one, will not be listening.
Has this been hyped up, or what?
Owen Roberts and Julius Bannister's comments from the Radio 4 Facebook page. They're talking about Vasily Grossman's novel, which has been described as one of the most important of the 20th century. Its radio dramatisation is taking up 8 hours' worth of network slots and features a stellar cast including Kenneth Branagh, Greta Scacchi, David Tennant and Janet Sussman. Even so, is it worth it?
We all die sooner or later.
But some of us sooner and some of us later. Goodbye.
I hadn't read the book. To my disgrace, I'm a Russian speaker and I had not even heard of the title.
It was fairly intimidating, I think.
What did he want of me?
It's a novel, I have to confess, I hadn't heard of.
All I did know was that my journey hadn't finished. I would never submit.
My first response was, this is undramatisable.
And that's just the production team, never mind the listeners, talking about the greatest book of the 20th century. Says who? Mark Damazer, for one, the former controller of Radio 4, who then left his successor, Gwyneth Williams, to oversee the mammoth task of adapting the 900-page tome for this network. But why did he think it was so important for us to hear it?
It deals with the largest possible themes: war, fascism, communism, but it also deals with great family relationships. It's a homage to the enduring nature of what humanity can be and is, set against the most atrocious deeds being done by one human being against another and by two appalling and abominable totalitarian systems.
Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. Dramatised for radio by Jonathan Meyerson and Mike Walker. Journey. Poland, autumn 1942.
I'm Mike Walker.
Jonathan Meyerson.
It was fairly intimidating, I think, looking at a novel that huge with that many characters, that many different storylines.
You're asked to consider this. It's a 900-page novel, and you think, where the hell do I start? And how do you begin to unravel it in order to take it down into bite-sized chunks, really?
Radio 4 is the only place you could have done this. It has the time. It has, above all, the intelligent audience who are prepared to give it time to make an effort. I'm sure that if there's stuff they don't like, they will be telling us all about that.
Listener Miff Tucker hasn't made up her mind yet, and despite studying the Radio 4 schedule and the Radio Times, she's a bit confused about how it's all going to fit together. A question I put to Jeremy Howe, who commissions drama for Radio 4.
Because it's a novel that no one's ever heard of, and we can't really expect everyone to be listening to with bated breath to each episode. The way we're going to do it is and it's the way it's written, in effect. It's a sequence of single plays, snapshots of people's lives around the moment when history changes. It's got a cast of hundreds of characters. If you're doing it in a conventional way, first of all, we'd probably render it incomprehensible because you've got such a big cast per episode, and secondly, it would cost shed loads of money.
But here you're going to clear a week. What justifies that scale of coverage?
Well, I think if you're going to do something, you want to jump in with both feet. And I think one of the things we want to do is we want to tell our audience why we're doing this. And one of the ways of doing it is obviously we set it up through Start of the Week. We're doing readings from Grossman's journalism. I mean, he was one of the great war journalists of the 20th century.
And is it much more expensive? If you could put the budgets of 5 dramas together, if you like, would it add up to the sum of money you're spending on this, or does this cost more?
It costs a little bit more because we have to pay for the rights to dramatise the novel and the translation rights, and it is there are a lot of characters.
So will you be tuning in every day from Monday to Friday? We asked listeners who were at a special Radio 4 Life and Fate Day in Oxford recently how they would be keeping on top of the story.
Well, I don't work, so I shall just listen to it next week.
I download it onto my iPod to listen to it because I'm never in one place for any length of time.
I'm lucky enough to have some time at home, so I think I'll try and catch them live. I always think I'm going to do catch up, but I don't quite manage it.
What about the ultimatum they sent to Hitler demanding an immediate release of all Jews?
I didn't hear about that.
They're keeping it secret, no doubt. Don't want to upset delicate negotiations.
Oh, shut up, Grandad.
What?
There aren't any negotiations.
As well as all the drama slots, last Monday's Start the Week was also transformed into a Life and Fate special.
The book is so devastating and so dangerous, if you like, to the Soviet state that it cannot be published for 200, 250 years or whatever.
It's very interesting. It says it can be published, but not for 200 to 300 years, which is kind of...
It's the greatest compliment that any totalitarian regime could possibly...
He didn't believe himself that the state...
And my name is Jeff Elman. I've just been listening to Start the Week. The most fascinating programme I've heard for a very, very long time. So magnificent, I'm going out to buy the book in the next few minutes.
It's Andrew Marr. Mostly I do mind the programme being hijacked by various people. Vasily Grossman, luckily, is a huge enthusiasm of mine. I think it was the then controller of BBC4 who pressed me up against a wall, waved a copy under my nose and said, if you want to be a serious person, you have to read this book. And so, being an obedient boy, I went off and read it and was completely transfixed, and since then I've been doing the same thing to other people. In fact, I was trying to look for my copy of it, and I realised I'd given it away again, and I keep buying it and giving it to people.
Well, that's 2 more converts. But here's another who had a bit of catching up to do before starting the project. The director of the dramatisation, Alison Hindle.
I hadn't read the book, to my disgrace. I'm a Russian speaker and I had not even heard of the title.
And when you did read it, were you afraid of the job?
My first response was, this is undramatisable.
Very public failure if it goes wrong. There's a lot riding on it, isn't there?
Yes. Yes, there is a lot riding on it.
Scared?
I suppose, no, not scared. I hope that the intelligent, inquiring minds of the Radio 4 audience will warm to parts of it, if not to all of it. And because we put it all in 1 week, will not be too cross, because it will soon be over if they dislike it.
Do you remember once you brought home our lost puppy and I said we couldn't take everything into the house, and you said,
"You're a cruel man."
And I said, I don't want you to be young and beautiful. I only want you to be one thing. I want you to be kind-hearted and not just towards cats and dogs.
You never cared about Tolya. Never. Not really.
Kenneth Branagh and Greta Scacchi as husband and wife, Victor and Luda. The great Branagh is in 3 of the 5 episodes. What was he like to work with?
He had been very assiduous in reading the novel. I can't say all the members of the cast had read the novel, but I wouldn't have expected it.
Did you have to go to the Director General, stand outside his office and beg him for money to get Kenneth Branagh to do this?
No, not at all. Not to be too indiscreet, but he agreed a very reasonable fee.
In directing Kenneth Branagh, you were directing somebody, apart from being a star, somebody who's just come back from directing a mammoth Hollywood movie and there's lots of film credits and so on. How difficult was it to direct such a person?
He was extremely easy to direct, actually. Was able completely to make the separation between being an actor and being a director, and a consummate professional in that sense. Kept everybody else in the studio cheerful and relaxed, and was extremely quick and precise to respond to the things that I was asking him to do.
Doubtless it made you feel you should be on your mettle, yes?
To be honest, I have been more nervous in the past working with other people who were more difficult.
Are they coming?
I should I know. I think they're coming. Yes, we should get out of here now.
Let's hope they make it. And please do let me know what you think. Now for another sort of novelist altogether, someone better known for his horticultural activities and common touch, and a hero of Middle England.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you, but a sad moment too, since this is the last Melodies for You. Over the 6 years that I've been presenting this unique mix of music, it's been a delight to discover what you love, often the kind of music that seldom gets an airing elsewhere. Well, tonight I've put together a rare old mix of...
After 6 years, Mr. T's celebration of popular classical and light music, Melodies for You, has come to an end, leaving his fans bereft. They want more of this kind of music on BBC Radio, not less.
My name is Geoffrey Taylor. I'm ringing to express my dismay at the cancellation of Melodies for You on Radio 2 on Sunday evenings.
Hi, I'm Wendy Crane. First of all, I like Alan as a presenter because he's very personal. You feel like he's speaking to you. And then the music, it's just not represented anywhere else, I don't think, in the schedules. I think it's wonderful.
There is now no programme at all in which you can be certain that you can hear popular classics. It is very disappointing. I don't understand the logic.
Till we meet again, wherever that may be, this is Alan Titchmarsh saying thank you so much for your company, and good night.
A few months ago, lots of you got in touch to say how much you'd enjoyed hearing light music on Radio 2 and Radio 3 during the BBC's Light Fantastic series. Is such music now under threat? Next week we'll be talking to someone from Radio 2 to explore how well or badly the BBC caters for those who enjoy light music. Do let me know what you think. Contact details coming up. I also wonder what Alan Titchmarsh would make of criticism this week over Gardener's Question Time. A national commercial tour has been scrapped, apparently due to lack of interest, and former presenter Stefan Buchatsky has been highly critical of the programme in the papers. Sour grapes or perceptive criticism? I'd love to know what you think about that or anything else you've heard on BBC Radio this week. You can write to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or leave phone messages on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or you can email feedback@bbc.co.uk. All those details are on our website. Alternatively, you could join our merry band on Twitter @BBCR4Feedback. Got more than 1,000 followers now. I'm sorry about that music, by the way. Every week we get emails to say how much you hate to hear music under speech in Radio 4 programmes. All you really want to hear are the unadorned words, even from me. Of course, it could be just that some pieces of music get on your nerves, like Facades by Philip Glass.
Salutations, ever-indulgent feedback folks. A certain Mark David Jacobs here. Today is Tuesday, the 30th of August. At 20:30, I settled down to listen to an episode of a thrilling serial, Rogue Male, on Radio 4 Extra.
The roof had a high vault, packed with clay. The drip trickled down the sides.
Then, at 2100, I switched over to Radio 4 to hear the concluding episode in the fascinating The First 1,000 Days, a Legacy for Life series.
My name is Ole Bygren. I'm a senior professor at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm.
Then, at 21:30, the Living on the Dark Side documentary, still on Radio 4.
I'm in the Bogside area of Derry, or Londonderry, Northern Ireland. It's a typical Derry day. Sunshine.
Needless to say, the secrets of this Secret Britain installment remain secrets to me, obfuscated not this time by government spies or acts of parliament, but by a variety of repetition that would make even Philip Glass himself politely suggest that someone somewhere might be overdoing it.
And that wasn't the end of it. In the same week, Facades also featured in Radio 4's Punt PI and the talented Mr. Ripley. Surely the hardest working music in Britain. We asked Radio 4 if it could explain this shattering affection for Glass amongst Radio 4's producers.
We do have systems in place to try and avoid programmes having the same guests or covering the same subject matter, but we don't have the resources to check the minutiae of what music is used on each programme. It's an extremely rare occurrence. In fact, we don't think it's ever happened before, or if it has, no one has been sharp enough to notice it. We hope it didn't impinge on the enjoyment of the programmes.
The conflict in Libya has dominated the summer's headlines, but some of you feel some interviews could have been handled better.
I was listening to the Today programme, and it was the coverage of the Defence Review.
The clearest example, I think, is that while increasing our commitments by committing our forces to Libya, we are reducing the resources available to deal with defence as a whole.
There were certain assumptions made in all the discussion that it was unquestionably right that Britain should have intervened in Afghanistan and Libya. Now, obviously, there's a case to be made for all these things, but there's also a case against it, and I don't feel we're hearing that case. I don't feel we're hearing the full range of views.
Hello, I'm Joe Lynch. I was listening to The World at One, and I was concerned about what I think was a live interview held with a human rights observer who was actually in the building where there were dead bodies that had been discovered.
We were trying to talk to witnesses. We're trying to go to the actual locations and look at the wounds and getting names and all of that. But this is clearly a scene in which there's I'm sorry here. Give me a second.
You take as long as you need.
I think it was inappropriate. I think it was verging on the pornographic even in terms of the detail that was happening at that stage, and was totally unnecessary.
I should probably go now.
Indeed.
But,
may I ask you just one final question?
Yeah.
You don't know the
circumstances. I'm Penny Francis. I was listening to World at One with Sean Lay a few weeks ago, and was concerned about the insensitivity shown to the lady in Libya when she was being interviewed in Tripoli. I found it upsetting, and I thought that the question should have stopped a lot sooner.
The BBC is also reporting the conflict back to those who were taking part in it or who are directly affected by it. And in August, the BBC Arabic section of the World Service began broadcasting on FM to the Libyan cities of Benghazi and Misrata. The service was already available on short and medium wave. I met Faris Khouri, editor of the Arabic service, to discuss how independent such broadcasts are and what difference it would make to have them available on FM as well.
Shortwave, it's very difficult to get, and there's lots of noise, and it's not the ideal medium to get radio now. And I think phasing out shortwave will be something in the near future. So we are better off on FM.
Do you know how large an audience you have? Is there a real appetite for the BBC Arabic service within Libya?
Oh yeah, very much so. Our FM service in Misrata and Benghazi serves about 1.4 million people.
Now, how much is this going to cost, and who's paying for it?
Forgive me if I can't say anything about the cost at the moment.
What I'm trying to get at, though, is it a situation where you've gone to the Foreign Office and you've said, look, this is transparently in the British interest, will you give us some extra money to open some additional services?
It doesn't work like this. We have already a plan to extend our coverage in FM, not only in Libya and other parts of the Arab world. We had the plan, and we were grateful that the Foreign Office actually helped us.
Well, yes, some would say actually it's rather more than that, isn't it? That you are, in a sense, part of British foreign policy. You work together. The BBC World Service and the Foreign Office work together to spread the word.
Well, we are not agents to the Foreign Office.
No, there's a symbiotic relationship there.
It's a well-known fact that we are being paid by the Foreign Office, but the Foreign Office or the British government never dictated our policy.
There must be various people in the Arab world who would enjoy portraying yourselves as an arm of the British government, and therefore suggested to people they don't pay that much attention to what you say. Do you find much of that, and how do you deal with it?
Well, the Arabic service have been there since 1939. I think we've passed this point. People do say that, some of them, it's a minority, but people do trust us, do trust our broadcast, and they regard us as the barrier of the truth more than being a representative of any government. We always give a chance for every party to express their point of view, whether it was a regime or an opposition.
And if Colonel Gaddafi was to ring up from wherever he may be, you would put him on air, no question.
Welcome. Yeah, we say welcome if he wants to speak to us, but not to use us as a vehicle. If he wants to ring and talk, he will be challenged like anybody else.
Faris Khouri, editor of the Arabic service. The BBC Trust will be carrying out a review of the BBC's reporting of conflict. We'll let you know how you can add your contributions to that review nearer the time. Not now, Philip. This time last week, the BBC proms were drawing to a close, with the Royal Albert Hall and Radio 3 quietly celebrating the highest ever average attendance for the concerts, up 2% on last year. But it wasn't all sweetness and light.
Well, I'm sorry that we're unable to continue with our broadcast of tonight's prom by the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra because of disruption in the Royal Albert Hall.
Radio 3 had to interrupt its live broadcast twice. A number of you got in touch to say how pleased you were that the concert was broadcast again some days later. Lauren Scott said, "Bravo to the BBC for letting us hear the Israel Philharmonic." And Alex Morgan emailed to say, "I was so disappointed when it was interrupted. The repeat was a great opportunity for classical music lovers to hear a world-class performance." But there have been protests of another kind this week, as Radio 3 has made changes to its schedule. Essential Classics, on weekday mornings, started on Monday, and Saturday Classics is new to the schedule this weekend. But it's the breakfast show, which is now starting half an hour earlier, which has raised some eyebrows, or should I say, battered some eardrums.
It's time for your call, your chance to tell us what a particular piece of music means to you. Today we're off to the lakes in Cumbria to talk to Jonathan Ward. Jonathan was born in South Africa, in Cape Town.
Listener Roger Purcell, yes, it's his real name, thinks that a news bulletin at the crack of dawn, weather forecasts and exhortations to get in touch have brought the classic FM touch to Radio 3 breakfast broadcastings. Pauline Littlewood agrees.
Too much of chat shows, news programmes, quiz programmes. I want pure and simple good music.
Andrew Goldie. Would anyone care to relay the thinking behind Radio 3's breakfast show starting 30 minutes earlier? News, weather, audience interaction. What has happened is there is less music played between 6 and 7 and more words spoken. I don't regard this as progress. At that time of day, I don't want to be jollied along by someone who seems to have had too much coffee when I've had none.
The friends of Radio 3 message boards have been buzzing too. Sarah Spilsbury speaks on behalf of the hundreds of members. But since the changes only came in on Monday, aren't they being a little hasty?
Well, it depends what you mean by these changes. I mean, this goes back to 2007, in fact. The new breakfast show started, and there have been various gimmicks and things that have been introduced since then. And I prefer to have a few slightly longer pieces of music and to concentrate on the music, not on the chat.
But of course, whenever there's a change on Radio 3, and certainly on Radio 4, there is some reaction against it. People don't, on the whole, like change. It takes a while for things to bed in. Are you sure that what we aren't witnessing now is simply that, a reaction to change, not to the nature of the change?
No, I'm absolutely certain about that. We've had, almost 4 years of it, and this is only, if you like, the latest thing, the phone-ins and the relaunch, which just seems to have been the last straw. I'm a listener who has virtually given up, and I know many others who have given up. I used to listen about 8 hours a day at one point. I now hardly listen at all because I'm not interested in this style of broadcasting.
Now, I'm going to talk to the controller of Radio 3 on this programme in a few weeks' time. What would you like me to ask him?
I would say to Roger, the BBC is chasing ratings, unfairly competing with Classic FM with public funds and committing cultural vandalism. Would he agree?
Well, I shall ask Mr. Wright that question, and any others you might like to send in, when he joins me on Feedback in a few weeks' time. So, until this time next week, more Philip Glass. Of Something Understood, Broadcasting House and Sunday, to name a few, supplemented considerable coverage on the news bulletins, and not just on the day itself. Was it over the top?
My name is Frank Cowell, and there was a kind of breakfast, lunch and tea approach which seemed to focus rather on sensationalism. Rather than the coverage being analytical, it focused on emotion.
I'm Warwick Armstrong, North Oxford. Of course, the BBC is totally right to remember the US tragedy of September the 11th, but where is the compassion in the BBC for others who've also suffered and who are now almost forgotten? I'm thinking particularly of the scores of
Something American?
In this special edition of Americana, we're going to take a step back from today's ceremonies and try to define just how the last decade has changed America.
My name's Clive Lovelace. I live in London W10. I've naturally been to New York. I have clients and friends there. I just found that just listening quietly to that programme the other night was just truly moving, and I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful programme.
David Edwards and Edward Jones were among a number of listeners who emailed to say that they couldn't see any sense in Radio 4 controller Gwyneth Williams' decision to axe the series, and would she please make a U-turn. I'm afraid I don't think this network's Iron Lady will do that, so last Sunday's was almost certainly the last Americana ever. Russia, on the other hand...
My first response was, this is undramatisable.
And I would be content, and I would be proud to die a communist.
You may have to leave the country and travel to Moscow to avoid it, as this network gives the blockbuster treatment to Vasily Grossman's Russian war epic Life and Fate, and blows several other programmes away in order to make space. And as we prepare for the long-awaited BBC announcements on how it plans to make £20 million in savings, we think we've identified an early initiative, getting out his money's worth from this piece of music. But first, what's the difference between news and history? Well, Radio 4 doesn't seem to know, according to many of you who wrote in about last weekend's coverage of the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Special editions. This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. The summer holidays are over, the children are back at school, the dew is heavy on the ground and the nights are drawing in. But cheer up, Feedback is back, the programme where you set the agenda and where conflict of one sort or another is rarely absent, even at the proms.
Well, I'm sorry that we're unable to continue with our broadcast of tonight's prom by the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra because of disruption in the Royal Albert Hall.
And have you heard of this? You will, if Radio 4 has anything to do with it.
Goodbye. It was fairly intimidating, I think.
What did he want of me?
It's a novel, I have to confess, I hadn't heard of.
Thousands of civilians who died in the American and British shock and awe assault on Baghdad. I can remember another 11th of September that is now virtually forgotten in the media. The day of the 1973 US-supported military overthrow of the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile.
Charlotte Evans from East London. I understand just how terrible 9/11 was, but what I can't understand is why this event gets so much more attention than other disasters. 9/11 falls into the category of history, not the category of news.
And it wasn't just Radio 4 that got it wrong. According to some listeners, Hilary Reid said 5 Live was particularly guilty of mawkish, unbalanced attention. But there was praise for Radio 4 for